The witness behind your eyes. Close your eyes right now, not later, not once you finish this sentence, but the moment you reach the end of it, and let your attention settle into the space just behind your forehead, slightly deeper than the point between your eyebrows, inside your skull, in the place where you can feel your thoughts arising like bubbles from the bottom of a dark ocean. Now, without moving your eyes, imagine that you are looking backward, into the center of your own head, searching for something you have never noticed before. What do you see? Probably nothing. Darkness. Maybe faint shapes or colors swimming behind your lids. That is fine. That is expected. But here is what the mystics want you to notice. Something is looking. Something is there, in the darkness behind your eyes, that is aware of the darkness. It is not your physical eyes, they are closed. It is not your thoughts. Thoughts come and go. This awareness, this silent witness, is present whether you are thinking or not. Now open your eyes. Imagine you are sitting in complete darkness, not the darkness of a bedroom with the lights off, not the darkness behind your eyelids when you are trying to sleep. A deeper darkness, the kind where your own hand disappears even when it is inches from your face. The kind that feels less like an absence of light and more like a presence waiting in the room with you. Someone is sitting across from you. You cannot see their face. You can only hear the slow rhythm of their breathing. Then, in a voice that sounds almost too calm, they whisper one sentence. Don't open what you can't close. You have just been introduced to two things. The witness, the silent awareness that was looking even when your eyes were shut, and the warning, the knowledge that inner vision comes with a cost. Because the danger is not that you will look inward and see nothing. The danger is that you might see too much. Your own fears before you are ready to face them. The emotions of others before you know how to protect yourself. The truth behind the curtain of ordinary life, and the quiet realization that the curtain was also protecting you. What is the third eye, really? You have just touched something. That silent awareness behind your eyes. The witness that was looking even when your eyelids were shut. Most people live their entire lives without ever noticing it. But you noticed it, and now you cannot unnotice it. So what exactly is it? Behind your forehead, right now, even as you watch this, there may be something seeing. Not in the sense of a lens, or a retina, or an optic nerve, but something that perceives without using your physical eyes. Something that the ancient world spent thousands of years trying to describe, map, warn about, and protect. In the ancient traditions of India, they called this the Ajna chakra. Ajna translates to command or perceiving. It is the sixth primary energy center in the body, located right between your eyebrows, slightly behind the frontal bone of your skull. In traditional yogic anatomy, the Ajna chakra is the seat of intuition, clairvoyance, and direct knowing. It is the place where you do not reason your way to a truth. You simply see it. In Buddhist iconography, you have probably noticed the figures with a circular mark on their forehead. That is the urna, one of the 32 physical marks of an enlightened being, sometimes depicted as a curl of hair, sometimes as a jewel, sometimes as an eye that sees in all directions at once. The urna radiates light, not literal light, but the light of understanding, the kind that illuminates entire world systems from within. In Taoism, the third eye is called the mind's eye, or the eye of the heart. The Taoist masters taught that there is a space behind your forehead where thinking stops and witnessing begins. They said most people spend their entire lives looking at the world through their two physical eyes. But the sage learns to look from the world through the third eye. A subtle difference, one that changes everything. And in Western esoteric traditions, the ones that emerged from Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and later Theosophy, the third eye was described as a dormant organ, something humans once used freely but lost over time, something that could be reactivated through specific practices. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, wrote in the late 19th century that the third eye was once an actual physical eye in humanity's ancient past, located at the back of the skull, now atrophied and buried deep in the brain. She was laughed at by the scientists of her day. But here is the thing about that laugh. It came a little too quickly, because there is something buried deep in the center of your brain, something shaped like a pine cone, something that is, in fact, an atrophied light-sensing organ, something that, in some reptiles and amphibians, still functions as a literal third eye, a parietal eye that detects changes in light and shadow. You have probably heard of it, the pineal gland. So before we go any deeper into the mysticism, let us talk about what is actually inside your head, because the truth turns out to be stranger than most people imagine. And that strangeness is exactly where the warnings, the ones whispered across centuries, the ones you just received, begin to make sense. A bone-shaped mystery. Open your mouth. Touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth. Feel that bony ridge? Now slide your tongue backward as far as it will go. You are feeling the hard palate, the floor of your skull, and somewhere about an inch above that spot, buried deep in the center of your brain, is a tiny gland the size of a grain of rice. The pineal gland. It got its name from Galen, the Greek physician of the 2nd century, who thought it looked like a pine cone. Pinealis in Latin. Pineal. The name stuck. But the gland itself has been known to anatomists far longer than that. Herophilus of Alexandria, the father of anatomy, described it in the 3rd century BCE. He called it the canarian, the little pine cone. And he noticed something immediately strange about it. Unlike almost every other structure in the brain, the pineal gland sits dead center, not to the left, not to the right, perfectly centered, hanging like a tiny pendulum from the roof of the 3rd ventricle, surrounded by cerebrospinal fluid, connected to the rest of the brain by nothing except a thin stalk of tissue. In the ancient world, the center was never accidental. The center was where the important things lived. Herophilus didn't know what it did. He just knew it was there. And he knew, with the instinct of someone who had spent his life inside the human body, that something so precisely placed must matter. Fast forward to the 16th century. Andreas Vesalius, the Flemish anatomist who invented modern human dissection, looked at the pineal gland and wrote something that science would later regret. He said, "It is not credible that this gland serves any necessary function. In other words, I cannot explain it, so I will assume it is unimportant. Science does this sometimes. When it cannot explain something, it labels it vestigial, redundant, irrelevant. And then, decades or centuries later, someone comes along and discovers that the label was wrong." Today, neuroscientists know exactly what the pineal gland does, at least in its basic biological role. It produces melatonin. Melatonin regulates your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycle. When darkness falls, your pineal gland releases melatonin and your body prepares for sleep. When light returns, melatonin production drops and you wake. That is the textbook answer. Clean, functional, unremarkable. But the textbook answer is not the whole story. Not even close. The pineal gland does not just respond to light indirectly, through signals relayed from your retinas. It has its own primitive light-sensing apparatus. In birds, amphibians, and reptiles, the pineal gland sits just beneath the skull and can detect light directly through the bone. In some lizards, the tuatara, certain iguanas, it is connected to a fully formed parietal eye, a third eye with its own lens, its own retina, sitting on top of the head beneath a patch of translucent scales. This eye cannot form images, but it can detect light and shadow. It can track the arc of the sun. It can feel the turning of the seasons in its tissue. That structure is not foreign to you. You had it. For a brief window during early fetal development, a few weeks before the architecture of the brain is fully assembled, your pineal gland migrated from the roof of your mouth to the center of your brain. And it did not make that journey empty-handed. it carried with it light-sensitive cells. Cells that still exist in your pineal tissue today. Cells that contain proteins called cryptochromes. The same proteins your retinas use to detect light. Pause here for a moment and let that settle. Your pineal gland cannot form images. It cannot see in the way your eyes see, but it can sense light. It retains, buried in its tissue, the molecular memory of when it was an eye, when it sat close to the surface of the body and felt the sun directly, before it was buried, before it was enclosed, before it became, to all appearances, a small and unremarkable gland whose only acknowledged job is to help you fall asleep. The mystics did not know about cryptochromes. They did not know about fetal migration patterns or circadian biology, but they knew something. They knew that between your eyebrows, deep inside your head, there was a gateway that had something to do with light and with seeing and with a kind of perception that the physical eyes could not explain. And they knew, with the certainty of people who had spent decades exploring inner space, that if you learned to wake it up, something would happen. Something they couldn't fully map in language. Something they felt compelled, across culture after culture and century after century, to warn you about. Now close your eyes again. Remember that inner visual space from the very beginning of this video. That subtle awareness of light and dark behind your eyelids. That sensation of something looking even when your physical eyes are shut. Is it possible that you are not imagining that? Is it possible that what you are sensing, however faintly, is the activity of a gland that was once a literal eye, that still carries, in its ancient cells, the memory of what it meant to face the light directly? The ancient name for the pineal gland in Sanskrit is ajna, command, perceiving, the seat of direct knowing. The mystics placed it exactly where the anatomists later found it. They described its function with precision that the science of their time had no framework to support. And now the science is catching up, slowly, reluctantly, the way science always does when reality turns out to be stranger than the current model allows. René Descartes, who came next, looked at this gland and made a claim that the scientific establishment dismissed for 3 centuries. But the evidence has been quietly accumulating. And what the evidence suggests is that Descartes, like the mystics before him, was pointing at something real. Something that the word soul may not be adequate to describe, but that the word irrelevant certainly is not. Descartes and the seat of the soul. Now we have to talk about a man who changed everything. A man who looked at the pineal gland and saw not a vestigial eye, but the bridge between 2 worlds. René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher who famously said, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes believed that the mind and the body were completely separate substances. The mind was non-physical, thought, consciousness, the soul. The body was physical, a machine of bones and nerves. But if they were completely separate, how did they interact? How did a thought in your non-physical mind cause your physical finger to move? Descartes needed a connection point, a seat of the soul. He searched through all the anatomical knowledge of his time. Then he found the pineal gland, small, central, unpaired, unlike almost everything else in the brain. Descartes believed that this tiny gland was the only structure that could move in response to the soul's commands, redirecting the flow of animal spirits through the nervous system. In his 1649 book, The Passions of the Soul, he wrote that the soul exercises its functions directly in this gland. Modern neuroscience says he was wrong. There is no single seat of the soul. Consciousness emerges from billions of neurons. But here's the strange part. Descartes wasn't entirely wrong either. The pineal gland is unique. It is central. It receives signals from both halves of the brain. It connects the endocrine system with the nervous system. And it responds to light, the most fundamental stimulus in the universe. In the late 20th century, researchers discovered that the pineal gland produces not just melatonin, but trace amounts of a psychedelic compound called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. DMT produces experiences that sound exactly like what mystics describe when the third eye opens. Suddenly, Descartes didn't seem so crazy. The seat of the soul? Maybe not. But a doorway to something that feels like the soul. A chemical bridge between ordinary waking consciousness and something vast and luminous and terrifying and beautiful. That the mystics would have recognized. And that, they would have said, is precisely why you need to be careful. The forbidden eye in ancient India. You need to understand something about the yogis who first mapped the third eye. They were not New Age spiritual tourists. They were not detached academics studying belief systems from a safe distance. They were explorers, pioneers, mad scientists of the inner world, and they left behind detailed manuals. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, written somewhere between the 2nd century BCE and the 4th century CE, describes the 8 limbs of yoga. The final limbs involve concentration, meditation, and eventually samadhi, a state of union with the object of meditation. But along the way, something happens. The practitioner begins to see things. Visions, lights, symbols, deities, past lives, the internal structure of reality. Patanjali calls these siddhis, powers, or attainments, and he warns about them, not because they're bad, but because they're distracting. The goal is not to see visions. The goal is liberation from suffering. If you get excited about a vision, you stay stuck. You become a spiritual tourist instead of a spiritual being. But other texts go further. The tantric traditions, which emerged in the early centuries of the Common Era, describe the third eye as part of a much more dangerous system. The system of chakras and kundalini. Kundalini is often described as a dormant energy coiled at the base of the spine, like a serpent sleeping. When awakened, it rises through the central energy channel, the sushumna, piercing each chakra along the way. The 6th chakra is the third eye. The 7th is the crown of the head, just above it. The tantric texts say that when Kundalini reaches the third eye, you experience something profound. Your mind becomes still. Your intuition becomes razor sharp. You see the unity behind all apparent separation. But here's the warning. If the Kundalini rises before your body and mind are ready, it can be devastating. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika, a 15th century manual, describes the dangers: involuntary movements, uncontrollable emotions, burning sensations along the spine, insomnia that lasts for weeks, hallucinations that blend with reality until you can't tell the difference. The text says that a practitioner who forces the Kundalini open without proper purification is like a child trying to ride a wild elephant. There's a story, told in multiple traditions, about a young monk who meditated on his third eye with intense focus. He wanted the visions. He wanted the powers. He practiced for hours every day, driving his awareness into the space between his eyebrows. And one day, it worked. Something opened. He saw light brighter than 1,000 suns. He felt ecstasy beyond anything he had ever known. And then the light didn't stop. It flooded his mind day and night. He couldn't sleep because the light kept him awake. He couldn't eat because his body no longer felt real. He couldn't talk to anyone because ordinary conversation seemed like nonsense compared to what he was seeing. Within 6 months, he had stopped eating entirely. Within a year, he was dead. The elders said, he opened his third eye before he opened his heart. He saw the light, but he had nowhere to put it. It consumed him. That is the ancient warning. Not that the third eye is evil. Not that you should never open it, but that you must prepare. You must purify. You must ground. You must learn to love ordinary reality before you peek behind the curtain. Because the curtain is not a curtain at all. It's a dam. And on the other side of the dam is an ocean. The curse of premature awakening. Let's talk about what actually happens to someone who opens their third eye too soon. Not in mythology, not in ancient texts, in the real, documented experiences of human beings. In the 1970s, a psychiatrist named Dr. Stanislav Grof began studying people who had undergone spontaneous spiritual experiences, experiences that came out of nowhere, without any practice or preparation. Some of these people had been meditating, some had been doing yoga, some had simply been going about their ordinary lives when something cracked open inside them. Grof called these experiences spiritual emergencies. He co-founded an entire discipline, transpersonal psychology, to study them. And he found a pattern. The premature opening of the third eye, or the premature awakening of Kundalini, or the sudden onset of mystical awareness, produces a cluster of symptoms that look, to an outside observer, almost identical to psychosis. Disorganized thinking, grandiose beliefs, sensory hallucinations, emotional volatility, withdrawal from social relationships. But here's the crucial distinction. In psychosis, the person usually loses the ability to function. They can't hold a job. They can't maintain relationships. They can't distinguish between subjective experience and objective reality in a way that allows them to navigate the world. In a spiritual emergency, when it goes well, the person eventually integrates the experience. They learn to function at a higher level. They come out the other side with deepened insight, compassion, and wisdom. But the when it goes well part is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because many people don't integrate. They get stuck. They become what Grof called the wounded mystics. People who touch something vast and couldn't find their way back to the small. The ancient yogic texts describe this as the curse of premature awakening. In the Yoga Vasistha, an ancient philosophical text, there's a story about a king named Sikidvaja. He renounced his kingdom to meditate in the forest. He opened his third eye. He saw visions of gods and cosmic energies. And then he became addicted to the visions. He wanted bigger visions, brighter lights, more ecstatic states. He pushed harder and harder until his mind shattered. It took his wife, who had remained grounded in ordinary life, years to bring him back. The warning echoes across traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, they call it La Gyo, God madness. The state where you become so intoxicated by spiritual experiences that you lose touch with conventional reality. The teacher Chogyam Trungpa, who brought Tibetan Buddhism to the West, warned his students constantly about what he called spiritual materialism, the tendency to collect spiritual experiences like trophies, to build an identity around being awake, to mistake the map for the territory. The third eye sees, but what it sees is not always comforting, and the act of seeing changes the seer. Think about it this way. Imagine you've lived your whole life in a dimly lit room. You know every shadow, every creak, every texture of the walls. You're comfortable there. Then one day, someone throws open the curtains and sunlight floods the room. You see dust in the air you never noticed. You see cracks in the walls you thought were smooth. You see the faces of the people in the room, and they see you, in a clarity that feels almost violent. That's the third eye opening. The sunlight is not the problem. The problem is your eyes haven't adjusted. Your nervous system hasn't learned to handle that much input. And the dust and the cracks were always there. You just couldn't see them. The question is not whether you want to see the dust. The question is whether you want to live in a room where you can't unsee it. The wounded eye of Horus. The ancient Egyptians had their own version of the third eye. They called it the Eye of Horus. And unlike the serene, benevolent eye you might imagine, the Eye of Horus has a scar. The myth goes like this. Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis. His father was murdered by his uncle, Set, the god of chaos, storms, and violence. Horus grew up vowing revenge. He fought a terrible battle with Set, a battle that lasted 80 years. During the fight, Set tore out Horus's left eye. He ripped it into 6 pieces and scattered them across the land. But here's where the story takes a strange turn. The god Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and magic, found the pieces. He could not restore the eye completely. A wound remained. But Thoth transformed the wounded eye into something new, something more powerful than the original. The Eye of Horus became a symbol of protection, healing, and royal power. Every pharaoh wore it. Every tomb displayed it. The wounded eye, the eye that had seen violence and survived, became the most sacred symbol in Egypt. Now, which eye was torn out? The left eye. And in Egyptian cosmology, the left eye represented the moon, intuition, the unconscious, the feminine, the hidden. The right eye was the sun, action, consciousness, the masculine, the revealed. Horus lost his moon eye. He lost his intuitive, inner seeing eye. And when it was restored by Thoth, it was restored with a scar, a permanent reminder that inner vision is not pristine. It comes through wounding. It comes through loss. It comes through the integration of what hurt you. This is a warning that most third eye enthusiasts miss. They want the light. They want the clarity. They want the visions of cosmic unity. But the Eye of Horus says, the eye that sees deeply is the eye that has been wounded. You cannot open your third eye without also opening the places where you have been broken. The Egyptians encoded this in the mathematics of the symbol. The 6 pieces of the eye, the 6 fractures, each represented a different fraction. The complete eye added up not to 1, but to 63 64ths. There was always 1 64th missing, always a fraction that could not be restored. The wounded eye was forever incomplete. Why? Because to see clearly is to see the incompleteness of everything, including yourself. The third eye doesn't show you a perfect universe. It shows you the cracks. It shows you the places where light bleeds through the darkness, and the places where darkness bleeds through the light. It shows you that you are not whole, have never been whole, and will never be whole. And then, in the same moment, it shows you that this incompleteness is not a flaw. It's the very thing that allows you to see. If you were complete, you would have nothing to look for. The Egyptian priests taught that the Eye of Horus could see into the underworld. It could see the dead. It could see the future. It could see the hidden intentions in the hearts of others. And they said that once you have that eye, you cannot close it at will. It sees whether you want it to or not. That is the burden. That is the warning. You might think you want to see what others are thinking. You might think you want to know what's coming. But do you? Do you really want to see the pain your friend is hiding behind their smile? Do you really want to see the disappointment in your partner's eyes that they haven't voiced yet? Do you really want to see your own death, waiting somewhere in the future, patient and inevitable? The Eye of Horus sees all of that, and it never blinks. The dreams that come first. Nobody tells you about the dreams. Every book about the third eye talks about meditation, about breathwork, about pineal activation and ancient techniques, and the disciplined withdrawal of the senses. They give you the practices, they give you the warnings, but almost none of them prepare you for what tends to happen before any of that, before the practices take hold, before you have done anything deliberately at all. The dreams change, not for everyone, not all at once, but for a significant number of people who begin seriously exploring the idea of inner vision, who start reading, asking, sitting quietly, paying attention. The first signal does not come in waking life. It comes at night. The dreams become more vivid, more structured, more symbolic in a way that feels almost deliberate, as though something behind the dream is choosing its images carefully. You wake up and the feeling does not leave with the images. It sits with you. It follows you into your morning. It asks you to remember it. Carl Jung spent decades studying this threshold. He believed the unconscious mind does not wait for the conscious mind to catch up. The moment genuine attention turns inward, the deeper layers of the psyche begin to move. He called this the process of individuation, the slow, sometimes terrifying journey of the self toward wholeness. And he noticed that the process almost always announced itself through dreams first. Compensatory dreams. Dreams that show you exactly what your waking life is hiding from you. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, this is not a side effect. It is a practice in itself. Dream yoga is one of the 6 yogas of Naropa, an advanced contemplative discipline that treats the dream state as a legitimate arena for awakening. The Tibetan teachers were explicit. The boundary between sleep and waking, between the unconscious and the conscious, between the inner eye and the outer world, is the same boundary. To train awareness in the dream state is to train the same faculty that the third eye represents in the waking state. The witness, the part of you that can observe experience without being consumed by it. What makes this territory dangerous, and why it belongs in a conversation about warnings, is that the unconscious does not edit itself for your comfort. When the inner eye begins to stir, it does not show you beautiful visions first. It shows you what has been waiting. And what has been waiting is almost always what you have been avoiding. Robert Waggoner, one of the most rigorous researchers of lucid dreaming in the modern era, documented case after case of people who entered deliberate dream practices and encountered not light and peace, but shadow, suppressed grief, unresolved fear, figures that represented disowned parts of themselves. This is not unusual. It is, according to nearly every serious tradition, the necessary first territory. You cannot reach the luminous layers of inner vision by skipping the dark ones. The eye that opens inward sees everything. It does not allow you to curate the view. This is why the ancient teachers did not begin their students with techniques for opening. They began them with practices for stabilizing. Ethical discipline first. Emotional regulation first. The capacity to sit with discomfort without fleeing it first. Because they understood what the modern spiritual marketplace tends to forget. The first thing the inner eye shows you is yourself. And for most people, that alone is more than enough to handle. So if you have started this journey, if you have been reading, thinking, sitting quietly, letting these questions into your mind, pay attention to your dreams tonight. Not to analyze them, not to decode them, just to notice whether something has already started moving. Because the third eye does not wait for your permission. It begins the moment you begin. And the first language it speaks is not vision. It is dream. It is symbol. It is the quiet, persistent image that refuses to leave you when the morning comes. The practices come later. The opening comes later. But this, the shift in the dream life, the arrival of images that feel chosen rather than random, this is often the first signal that something behind your eyes has already started to wake up. You may have already noticed it. You simply did not know what you were noticing. Now you do. The third eye as a vulnerability. There's a paradox at the heart of the third eye that almost nobody talks about. On one hand, the third eye is a source of power, intuition, clairvoyance, direct knowing, the ability to perceive what others miss. On the other hand, the third eye is a source of profound vulnerability. Think about your physical eyes for a moment. When they're open, you can see danger coming. You can see a car running a red light. You can see a cliff edge before you step off it. Your eyes protect you, but they also expose you. Because when your eyes are open, you can see things that hurt you. You can see violence. You can see betrayal. You can see the body of someone you love lying still. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The third eye works the same way, but worse. Because the third eye sees things that your physical eyes would filter out. It sees emotional atmospheres. It sees the unspoken tension in a room. It sees the sadness behind a brave face. It sees the anger behind a calm voice. Mystics across traditions describe this as a dangerous gift. In the Sufi tradition of Islam, there's a concept called basira, inner vision, spiritual insight. The Sufis said that basira is a blessing from God, but it comes with a heavy responsibility, because when you see the truth of another person's heart, you cannot use that knowledge to harm them, and you cannot pretend you don't know. In the Christian contemplative tradition, Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about the eyes of the soul, the inner vision that comes through deep prayer. She described moments when God showed her the state of other people's souls, their sins, their virtues, their secret struggles. And she said it was almost unbearable. She wanted to look away, but the eyes of the soul, once opened, do not close on command. In the yogic tradition, the third eye is called drishti, seeing. But the same word is used for the gaze of a realized master. A master's gaze is said to be so penetrating that it can strip away your defenses. You cannot lie to someone with an open third eye. They don't need to hear your words. They see the truth beneath them. And for many people, that is terrifying. Here's the vulnerability that nobody mentions. When you open your third eye, you don't just see others more clearly. They see you more clearly. Because something in your own gaze changes. Your eyes become windows into something deeper. People who are sensitive will feel it. They will feel seen in a way that makes them uncomfortable. Some will be drawn to you, others will recoil, and some will try to hurt you. Because people who cannot bear being seen will sometimes try to destroy the seer. The ancient warnings about the third eye were not just about internal dangers, psychosis, spiritual bypass, Kundalini syndrome. They were also about social dangers. In many traditional cultures, people with strong inner vision were isolated. They were feared. They were accused of witchcraft. They were burned. The third eye makes you powerful, but power without protection is a liability. And the mystics knew that the only true protection is not armor. It's not the ability to fight back. It's the ability to see without being destroyed by what you see. It's the ability to hold what you witness with compassion instead of judgment. It's the ability to remain grounded in your own heart, even when your eye is showing you the darkest corners of existence. If you want to open your third eye, you must first ask yourself a question. Not, am I ready to see, but am I ready to be seen? Fluoride and calcification. Now we enter territory where science meets suspicion, where documented biology collides with uncomfortable questions, and where the line between legitimate inquiry and conspiratorial thinking becomes genuinely difficult to draw. Here is what we know for certain. The pineal gland calcifies with age. Calcium phosphate crystals accumulate in the gland over time, forming what researchers call brain sand, or acavuli. Under a microscope, these calcifications look like tiny grains of sand scattered through the pineal tissue. By the time most people reach old age, the pineal gland can be heavily calcified, sometimes to the point where it appears clearly on a CT scan. This is not fringe science. This is documented, peer-reviewed biology that has been observed consistently across decades of research. What is less settled is what accelerates that calcification. And this is where fluoride enters the conversation, not through the back door of conspiracy forums, but through a series of peer-reviewed studies that deserve to be taken seriously, even if their conclusions remain debated. Several studies, including research from the University of Texas Health Science Center, have found that fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland more than in any other soft tissue in the body, more even than in bones and teeth. The pineal gland's high blood flow and its unusual position outside the blood-brain barrier make it uniquely exposed to substances circulating in the bloodstream. In animal studies, elevated fluoride exposure has been linked to earlier and more extensive calcification. In human studies, the picture is less conclusive, but continues to generate legitimate scientific interest. This is the honest starting point, not a government conspiracy to suppress your awakening, not a deliberate suppression of human consciousness. Just a small gland with unusual biology, sitting in an unusual position inside your skull, doing something that science has only partially mapped, and accumulating, over the course of a lifetime, a substance that may or may not be slowing it down. However, and this is a crucial however, correlation is not causation. Aging itself causes pineal calcification. So do diet, genetics, and other environmental factors. No study has definitively proven that fluoride causes significant pineal calcification at the levels found in public water supplies, 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million. Now, let's talk about what calcification might mean for the third eye. If you believe, as the mystics did, that the pineal gland is the physical correlate of the third eye, then calcification would presumably impair its function. Reduced melatonin production has been linked to pineal calcification. And melatonin is not just a sleep hormone, it's an antioxidant. It regulates reproductive hormones. It influences mood and immune function. But does calcification impair inner vision, intuition, clairvoyance? There is no scientific evidence for or against this claim, because science does not have a way to measure inner vision. The question falls outside the current boundaries of scientific inquiry. This is where the forbidden framing becomes interesting. If fluoride really does suppress pineal function, and if pineal function really is connected to expanded awareness, then water fluoridation could be seen as a form of mass suppression. The fact that fluoride was introduced into public water supplies in the mid-20th century, at the same time that interest in psychedelics and altered states was rising, seems suspicious to some, but the evidence doesn't support a conspiracy. Pineal calcification has been observed in ancient human remains, long before industrial fluoride. Aging calcifies the pineal whether you drink fluoridated water or not. And the levels of fluoride that cause significant calcification in animal studies are much higher than what humans typically ingest. Here's what the mystics would say about this. They would say, stop focusing on the external. The third eye is not a light bulb that turns on and off based on what you consume. It is not a muscle that atrophies because someone puts something in your water. The third eye is a dimension of consciousness. It opens through attention, not through chemistry. And while physical health matters, the real calcification is not in your gland, it's in your mind. The real suppression of the third eye is not fluoride. It's the belief that you don't have one. It's the cultural conditioning that tells you that inner vision is imaginary, that intuition is unreliable, that your interior life is less real than your exterior life. That is the true calcification, and no amount of clean water will dissolve it. But there is a reason this topic resonates. Because the idea that something has been taken from you, that you were born with a power that was secretly suppressed, is deeply compelling. It offers an explanation for why you don't feel as awake as you think you should. It offers an enemy to blame, and it offers a solution. Avoid fluoride, detoxify, and your third eye will open. The mystics would say, that's not how it works. The third eye opens when you sit still and watch your mind. It opens when you stop looking for something to blame and start looking inward. It opens when you accept that there is no external enemy. The only thing blocking your inner vision is your own unwillingness to see what's already there. But if the pineal gland is the physical door to the third eye, then the next question is not what closes it, it is what opens it. And the most controversial answer to that question does not come from ancient India or medieval Europe. It comes from a government-approved laboratory in New Mexico in 1990, where a psychiatrist injected volunteers with a molecule that the human brain produces on its own, and watched them disappear into another world. The DMT connection, Strassman's discovery. In 1990, a psychiatrist named Dr. Rick Strassman received permission from the US Drug Enforcement Administration to do something extraordinary. He was going to inject human volunteers with a psychedelic compound called DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and study what happened. It was the first human psychedelic research in the United States in over 20 years, and Strassman chose DMT for a very specific reason. DMT is structurally similar to serotonin and melatonin. It's produced naturally in trace amounts by the human body, including, Strassman hypothesized, by the pineal gland. He published his findings in a 2000 book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and what he found changed the conversation about the third eye forever. Strassman's volunteers, who received high doses of DMT intravenously, reported experiences that were remarkably consistent. They described entering a tunnel of light. They described encountering beings, sometimes helpful, sometimes indifferent, occasionally malevolent. They described entire universes of geometric complexity. They described time stopping. They described feeling as though they had died and gone somewhere else. And crucially, they described a sense of non-dual awareness, the feeling that the separation between self and world had dissolved. The same description that mystics use for the opening of the third eye. Strassman proposed that the pineal gland might synthesize and release DMT during two critical life events: birth and death. During birth, a flood of DMT might help the infant transition from the darkness of the womb to the light of the world. During death, a release of DMT might explain the near-death experience, the tunnel, the light, the life review, the sense of peace. He also speculated that DMT might be released during deep meditation, mystical experiences, and perhaps during REM sleep, the stage of sleep when dreaming occurs. He noted that the pineal gland contains all the necessary enzymes to convert tryptophan, an amino acid, into DMT, and he called for more research. The research has been slow. DMT is a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States, which makes studying it difficult and expensive. But in the years since Strassman's work, other researchers have made progress. Dr. J.C. Calloway at the University of Kuopio in Finland developed a method for detecting DMT in human urine and blood. Dr. Stephen Barker at Louisiana State University published a study in 2012 demonstrating that the human pineal gland can, in fact, synthesize DMT in the laboratory. The evidence is not conclusive, but it's suggestive, and it points in a direction that the mystics have been pointing for millennia. Here's what Strassman himself concluded. He said that DMT is not the spirit molecule in the sense of being the substance of spirit itself. He said it's more like a key that opens a door to non-ordinary states of consciousness. The key is not the room, the key just turns the lock, and the lock, he believed, is located in the pineal gland. But here's the warning that Strassman's work inadvertently uncovered. The volunteers who had terrifying experiences, and some of them did, were not fundamentally different from the ones who had blissful experiences. The difference was not in the molecule. The difference was in the set and setting, their mindset and their environment before the experience. And crucially, the difference was in what they brought back. Some volunteers integrated their experiences beautifully. They felt more connected, more compassionate, more at peace. Others were haunted. They couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen. They felt that the beings they encountered were still watching them. They felt that ordinary reality was a thin veneer over something vast and terrifying. Strassman called this the problem of integration. He said that the DMT experience was like going to a foreign country. If you go for a weekend, you come back with souvenirs and stories. If you go for a month and don't speak the language, you come back disoriented. But the DMT experience is not like going to France. It's like going to another dimension, and some people have trouble finding their way back. The ancient mystics knew this. That's why they had initiation rituals. That's why they had guides. That's why they didn't let just anyone sit in a dark cave for 40 days. Because they knew that the third eye opens onto a landscape that can swallow you if you're not prepared. The DMT research is a modern mirror of an ancient truth. The pineal gland, the third eye, is a doorway, but doorways open in both directions, and you don't always control what comes through. But what happens when the door opens not in a laboratory, not through meditation, not through any practice at all, but in the final moments of dying? What happens when the pineal gland releases its last flood of chemistry into a brain that is shutting down? The people who have come back from that threshold have something to say. And what they say changes the question entirely. It is no longer, how do I open the third eye? It becomes, what will I see when I have no choice but to look? What happens in near-death experiences? You've heard the stories. A person's heart stops. Their brain activity flatlines. They are clinically dead. And then, minutes later, they are resuscitated. And they tell a story, a tunnel, a light, a sense of floating above their own body. A life review where every moment of existence flashes before them. An encounter with beings of light. A border, a threshold, a point of no return. And then a feeling of being sent back. Not because they wanted to come back, because someone, or something, told them it wasn't their time. These are near-death experiences, NDEs, and they have been reported across cultures, across centuries, across religious traditions. In the last 50 years, researchers have collected thousands of accounts. Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in 1975, documented common features that appear again and again. Dr. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia has spent decades studying NDEs, publishing over 100 peer-reviewed papers. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, conducted a prospective study of 344 cardiac arrest patients and found that 18% reported some memory of consciousness during the period when they were clinically dead. What does this have to do with the third eye? The connection is the pineal gland and the light. In many NDE accounts, the experiencer reports moving through a tunnel toward a brilliant light. That light is often described as warm, loving, intelligent, not like sunlight, but like the source of all consciousness. Mystics across traditions have described exactly this light when writing about the third eye. In the yogic tradition, the third eye opens to reveal the Jyoti, the inner light, the divine radiance, the source of all perception. Dr. STRASSMAN'S DMT hypothesis proposes that the pineal gland releases a flood of DMT during the dying process, producing the NDE. But the DMT hypothesis is not the only one. Dr. van Lommel, in his book Consciousness Beyond Life, argues that NDEs suggest that consciousness is not produced by the brain, that the brain is more like a receiver than a generator. When the receiver breaks, the signal continues. Whether you accept van Lommel's conclusion or not, there is something undeniable about the NDE literature. People return from the brink of death changed. They lose their fear of dying. They become more compassionate, less materialistic, more spiritually oriented. They often report that their intuition, their ability to read people, to sense what's coming, has dramatically improved. In other words, they return with what looks like an open third eye. And here's where the warning comes in. Not all NDEs are blissful. About 10 to 15% of reported NDEs are distressing. The experiencer encounters a void, a darkness, a sense of being trapped. They encounter beings that are not loving, but menacing. They feel that they are being judged, not by a benevolent light, but by something cold and indifferent. Dr. Grayson has studied these distressing NDEs extensively. He found that they often share a common thread. The experiencer, during the life review, is forced to confront something they have been avoiding. A trauma, a pattern of behavior, a relationship they damaged and refused to repair. The darkness is not a punishment from outside. It is a confrontation with the parts of themselves they refuse to look at. The third eye shows you everything, including the things you have hidden from yourself, including the things you have hidden so deeply that you forgot they existed. The light and the darkness are not two different things. They are the same thing perceived differently by a mind that is ready or not ready to see. The mystics warned about this. They said that the third eye is not a door to a theme park. It is a door to reality. Reality stripped of your comfortable illusions. And reality, seen too quickly, can feel like torture. Not because reality is evil, because you are not yet strong enough to hold what is true. The NDE research suggests that you don't have to meditate for 20 years to get there. Sometimes it happens in a moment. A car crash, a heart attack, a fall. And suddenly, the veil is torn. You are seeing through the third eye, whether you ask to or not. So the warning is this: do not assume that the third eye is something you can approach at your own pace, on your own terms. It can open without your permission, and once it opens, it does not close just because you're scared. The blind prophet. Now consider something that might change everything you think you know about the third eye. What if the third eye has nothing to do with your physical eyes? What if losing your physical sight could actually enhance your inner vision? There is a long and remarkable history of blind mystics, poets, and prophets who described seeing in ways that the sighted cannot imagine. Helen Keller is the most famous example. Deaf and blind from the age of 19 months, she learned to communicate, to read, to write, to advocate for the disabled. But less known is her description of her inner life. Keller wrote about a subtle light that she saw even though her physical eyes could not see. She described perceiving the presence of other people, their moods, their intentions, their emotional states, through something other than sound or touch. She called it the sixth sense. In her 1908 essay, The Sense of a Sixth, she wrote, "There is a something in me that sees and hears and touches, a sense that is not one of the five." Neurologists have studied this phenomenon. It's called blind sight, the ability to respond to visual stimuli without consciously seeing them. Some blind people can detect the emotion on a face they cannot see. They can sense the direction of a light they cannot perceive. The brain is doing something remarkable. It is receiving information through the eyes or through alternative pathways and presenting that information to consciousness not as an image, but as a knowing. Dr. Lotfi Merabet at Harvard Medical School studied blind individuals using fMRI. He found that when blind people read Braille, the visual cortex, the part of the brain that normally processes sight, lights up. The brain has rewired itself. The seeing part of the brain is now processing touch. What if the third eye is not a separate organ at all? What if it is a mode, a way of processing sensory information that bypasses the usual pathway of visual imagery? What if opening your third eye means learning to see not with your eyes, but with your whole brain? The blind prophets of history would agree. There is a reason that the seer Tiresias in Greek mythology was blind. There is a reason that shamans in many cultures undergo ritual blinding, not literal blinding, but the covering of the physical eyes during initiation. The physical eyes see the surface. The inner eye sees the depth. And sometimes, the physical eyes get in the way. Consider the story of John Hull, a theologian who went blind in his 40s. He wrote a book called Touching the Rock, an experience of blindness. In it, he describes how his blindness opened a new relationship with reality. He writes, "When I could see, I took the world for granted. I looked at things without really seeing them. Now that I cannot see, I have to build the world from sound, from touch, from memory. And in doing so, I have become aware of a depth to things that I never noticed when I could see their surfaces." He goes on to describe what he calls the dark mirror, the inner space that opens up when the outer world grows dim. In that dark mirror, he says, he began to see, not with his eyes, but with his whole being. He began to sense the presence of people before they spoke. He began to feel the weather in his bones. He began to dream in vivid, almost hallucinatory detail. John Hull opened his third eye because he had no choice. His physical eyes failed, and something else turned on. The mystics warned that the third eye is not something you pursue. It is something that opens when you stop being so attached to what your physical eyes show you. The physical eyes show you a world of separate objects, of surfaces, of appearances. The third eye shows you connection, depth, essence. But you cannot see both at the same time with equal clarity. You have to choose which eye you look through. Most people never make that choice. They look through their physical eyes their whole lives, assuming that what they see is all there is. And the third eye remains dormant, not because it is broken, not because it has been calcified by fluoride, but because it has been ignored. The blind prophet sees because they have no choice but to look with the eye that cannot close. But you have a choice. You can choose to close your physical eyes, right now, for just a moment, and ask yourself, what do I see when I stop looking at surfaces? That question is the beginning. Not of a technique, not of a practice, just a question, a crack in the door, a whisper in the darkness. And that whisper, that question, is exactly where the ancient mystics would want you to start. Not by forcing anything open, not by chasing visions, just by wondering, what does the eye inside you already see that you have been refusing to look at? That question is not rhetorical. For many people, the answer arrives unbidden, not as a vision, not as a revelation, but as a feeling. A knowing that settles into the chest at 3 in the morning and refuses to leave. The shadow of clairvoyance does not announce itself with light. It announces itself with weight. And learning to carry that weight without being crushed by it, without closing yourself against it, is the skill that separates the grounded seer from the haunted one. The shadow of clairvoyance, seeing what haunts. You wake up at 3:17 in the morning. There's no sound, no light, nothing obvious disturbed you, but something is wrong. A feeling sits in your chest like a cold stone. You check your phone, no messages. You listen, nothing. And yet, you know. You know that something has happened. Someone is in pain. Somewhere, a door just closed that will never open again. The phone rings the next morning, or the news arrives, or you walk into a room and see the faces of the people you love, and you realize that your knowing was correct. You saw it, not with your eyes, with something else. This is the shadow of clairvoyance, not the glamorous gift of seeing the future or reading minds. The ordinary, daily, sometimes unbearable ability to feel what you were not meant to feel. The mystics warned about this more than any other danger. They said that an open third eye is not a television you can turn off. It is a radio that picks up every station at once. And some of those stations are broadcasting static. Some are broadcasting screams. In the yogic tradition, the third eye is associated with the manas, the lower mind that processes sensory information. When the third eye opens prematurely, the manas becomes flooded with impressions that the intellect cannot sort. You begin to feel other people's emotions as if they were your own. You walk into a room and instantly know who is angry, who is grieving, who is hiding something. You cannot stop this knowing. It arrives whether you want it or not. In the beginning, it feels like power. You understand people in ways they do not understand themselves. You see through lies. You sense danger before it arrives. But then something shifts. The constant input becomes exhausting. You stop wanting to be around people because being around people feels like standing in a hail of invisible darts. Every glance, every silence, every forced smile, you feel the truth behind all of it. There is a name for this in modern psychology. It's called hypervigilance. It's a symptom of trauma. But in the spiritual literature, it's described as the curse of the ungrounded seer. You have opened your third eye, but you have not built the container to hold what pours through. Consider the story of a woman who attended a Vipassana meditation retreat in Burma. 10 days of silence, 10 days of watching the breath. By the 5th day, she began to see auras around the other meditators. By the 7th day, she could see their emotional states as colors: red for anger, gray for grief, yellow for joy. By the 9th day, she could see their thoughts, not in words, in images. She saw that the man across the hall was fantasizing about violence. She saw that the woman behind her was reliving a childhood memory of abuse. She saw so much that she stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She curled into a ball and wept. The teacher took her aside and said, "You have opened your eye, but you have not learned to filter. Close your eye. Close it now. Return to the breath. Do not look at anyone until you can look at yourself." She spent the next 6 months learning to close her third eye. It was harder than opening it had been, because closing it meant choosing not to know. It meant accepting that she would never know what others were really feeling. It meant returning to ordinary uncertainty, which suddenly felt like blindness. This is the shadow that no one puts on a poster. An open third eye can show you the beauty of the universe. It can also show you the secret shame of your neighbor, the hidden grief of your parent, the unspoken hatred in the smile of someone you trusted. And once you have seen those things, you cannot pretend they are not there. The mystics said that the third eye must be opened in parallel with the heart chakra. The heart grounds vision in compassion. Without the heart, the third eye becomes a cold, detached observer. It sees suffering and does not know how to respond except to withdraw. With the heart, the third eye sees suffering and feels the impulse to help, not to fix, not to save, but to be present. If you feel that your third eye is opening, or if you suspect it is already more open than you want it to be, the mystics would give you one piece of advice. Do not look outward. Look inward. See your own shadows first. See your own grief. See your own hidden hatred and shame. Because the third eye shows you in others what you have not yet seen in yourself. And until you have made peace with your own darkness, the darkness you see in others will destroy you. This is not a warning against seeing. It is a warning against seeing without preparation. And the preparation, the actual, measurable, scientifically documented preparation, turns out to be something far simpler and far more radical than any ancient ritual. It is sitting still. It is breathing. It is the practice that neuroscientists have spent the last 2 decades studying in laboratories, emerging with findings that the mystics would have recognized immediately, and that change what we think we know about the physical brain itself. Meditation's real effect on the pineal. Sit quietly for a moment. Notice your breath. Notice the space between your thoughts. That's all. Just notice. You have just done something that, if repeated consistently over years, changes the physical structure of your brain. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience. In 2005, Dr. Sarah Lazar at Harvard Medical School published a landmark study. She compared the brains of long-term meditators to non-meditators using MRI. The meditators had increased gray matter density in the hippocampus, memory, the prefrontal cortex, self-awareness, and the insula, the sense of your own internal state. They also showed reduced age-related atrophy in those regions. Other research, including studies by Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, found that experienced meditators show increased gamma-wave coherence, the fastest brainwaves associated with peak concentration and insight. They also show a quieter default mode network, the part of the brain that generates the narrative of me. Now, what about the pineal gland specifically? Direct studies are limited, but indirect evidence is suggestive. Meditation alters melatonin production. Some studies show meditators have higher nighttime melatonin and less age-related pineal calcification. The mystics would not be surprised. They would say, of course the brain changes. Consciousness is not separate from the body. When you open the third eye, you are not adding something new. You are removing obstacles. And here is the quiet warning. The benefits of meditation, reduced anxiety, improved emotional regulation, are not correlated with the intensity of mystical experiences. You don't need to see lights or visions. The person who sits for 20 minutes a day and simply watches their breath is changing their brain just as much as the person who spends hours trying to blast open their third eye. The third eye opens in relaxation, not in effort. It opens in acceptance, not in grasping. The pineal gland does not respond to your demands. It responds to your surrender. The danger of spiritual bypass. There is a particular way that people use the third eye to run away from themselves. It has a name: spiritual bypass. The term was coined by John Welwood, a clinical psychologist and Buddhist teacher in the 1980s. He noticed something strange in his meditation students. Some of them were using their spiritual practice to avoid dealing with their ordinary human problems. They would talk about emptiness, non-attachment, the illusion of the self, but they couldn't have an honest conversation with their partner. They would describe their visions of light and unity, but they couldn't pay their bills on time. They would speak of compassion for all beings, but they were cold and dismissive toward anyone who disagreed with them. Spiritual bypass is using spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep emotional wounds, relational issues, and psychological unfinished business. And the third eye is a perfect vehicle for spiritual bypass because it offers an escape hatch from ordinary reality. You feel anxious? Don't investigate the anxiety. Just open your third eye and rise above it. You feel angry at your parent? Don't have the difficult conversation. Just see that anger is an illusion. You feel lonely? Don't reach out to someone. Just rest in the vast, unified field of consciousness. The mystics warned about this explicitly. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says that the siddhis, the powers that come from advanced practice, are obstacles to liberation. They are seductive. They feel like progress. But they can trap you in a more subtle form of ego. The ego that says, I am more awakened than you. The ego that says, I see what others cannot see. The third eye, when used for spiritual bypass, becomes a way to dissociate from your own humanity. You float above your pain instead of feeling it. You see the light instead of sitting in the dark. And in doing so, you never actually heal. You just develop a very sophisticated way of hiding. This is why the ancient traditions insisted on the integration of the chakras. The third eye is the sixth chakra. Above it is the seventh, the crown, which represents connection to the divine. Below it are the lower chakras, the root, survival, safety, the sacral, emotion, sexuality, creativity, the solar plexus, will, power, and the heart, love, relationship. The energy cannot flow properly if you jump straight to the sixth. You have to clear the lower chakras first. You have to do the messy, painful work of healing your childhood wounds, your relationship patterns, your relationship with your body, your relationship with power and control. If you open your third eye without clearing the chakras below it, the energy has nowhere to go. It gets stuck in the head. You become top-heavy. You become the person who can talk about non-duality, but cannot feel their own feet on the ground. You become the person who has visions of angels, but cannot weep at a funeral. Wellwood wrote that genuine spirituality does not bypass anything. It includes everything: the pain, the confusion, the ordinariness, the boredom, the frustration, the grief. The third eye is not a way out. It is a way in, into the fullness of your human experience. So here is a test. If your third eye practices are making you feel superior to others, you are bypassing. If they are making you avoid difficult emotions, you are bypassing. If they are making you less able to be present for the people you love, you are bypassing. If they are making you less able to laugh, to cry, to feel angry, to feel joyful, you are not opening your third eye. You are using it as a hiding place. The mystics said that the true sign of an open third eye is not visions or powers. It is a quality of presence. The ability to sit with someone in their suffering without trying to fix it. The ability to be with your own suffering without trying to escape it. The ability to see clearly, and then to act with kindness in the ordinary, messy, beautiful world. The cost of knowing. Can you unsee what you have seen? There is a question nobody asks at the beginning of the spiritual path. They ask how to start. They ask how long it takes. They ask what practices to use and what experiences to expect, and whether what they felt during meditation was real or imagined. They ask how to open. Nobody asks whether you can close it again. This is not a small question. It might be the most important one. Because embedded in the warning you heard at the very beginning of this video, "Don't open what you can't close," is a claim about the nature of inner vision that most modern spiritual content carefully avoids. The claim that certain kinds of seeing are irreversible, that once the inner eye has genuinely opened, even partially, the world does not look the same afterward, and that for some people, in some circumstances, that change is not a blessing. It is a weight they were not prepared to carry. St. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul. He was not being poetic. He was describing a specific, recognizable stage in the contemplative journey where the ordinary consolations of spiritual practice, the warmth, the peace, the sense of progress, disappear entirely, where the practitioner is left in a kind of inner desolation that can last for months or years. John himself endured it. Teresa of Avila described it. Thomas Merton wrote about it. What they all had in common was the understanding that this darkness was not a sign that something had gone wrong. It was a sign that the opening had gone deep enough to destabilize the old self, but not yet deep enough to build the new one. The problem in the modern context is that most people encountering this stage have no framework for it. They have not been prepared by years of community, guidance, and grounded practice. They have been watching videos, reading books, taking psychedelics, doing breathwork intensives, and attending weekend retreats. They have touched something real. And then, when the darkness comes, when the sensitivity becomes overwhelming, when the ordinary world feels unbearably thin, when they can feel the emotional states of the people around them like weather systems they cannot escape, they have no map. The psychological literature has a name for a related phenomenon: spiritual emergency. The term was developed by Stanislav and Christina Grof, who noticed that a significant number of people entering non-ordinary states of consciousness through contemplative practice or psychedelics were being diagnosed with psychosis when what they were actually experiencing was a rapid, disorienting expansion of awareness that their nervous system and psychological structure were not yet equipped to integrate. The content of the experience was not pathological. The context was, they were opening faster than they could absorb. And here is the irreversibility that matters. You cannot go back to not knowing that the inner dimension exists. You cannot unfeel the moment the witness became visible to you. You cannot unsee what the inner eye has shown you, even if what it showed you was your own unprocessed grief, your own hidden fear, your own carefully constructed identity beginning to come apart at the seams. Post-traumatic growth research, the work of Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, documents how a certain percentage of people who go through shattering experiences come out the other side with a deeper relationship to life, a stronger sense of meaning, a greater capacity for connection. But the research also documents that this growth is not guaranteed. It does not happen automatically. It requires integration. It requires time. It requires the willingness to stay in the wreckage long enough to understand what it is teaching you, rather than fleeing it through distraction or spiritual bypass. The people who come out the other side of a genuine inner opening and describe it as transformative almost always say the same thing when you ask them what made the difference. Not the experience itself, not the visions or the states or the moments of expanded awareness. What made the difference was the support, the grounding, the willingness to be patient with the process, and the absence of the desperate need to make it stop. There is one more thing that needs to be said here, and it is directed not at the person who is considering opening their third eye, but at the person who is watching this because something already happened to them. The dream that felt too real, the moment of knowing that came before the phone call, the experience during meditation or during illness or during an ordinary afternoon that cracked something open without permission and left you wondering whether you were losing your mind or finding it. If that is you, if the door opened before you chose it, then the warnings in this video are not warnings for you. They are explanations. They are the map you were never given. What you experienced was real. It was not pathology. It was not fantasy. It was the third eye opening in the way it sometimes does. Not gradually, not gently, not on your schedule. And the fact that you are here, still asking questions, still trying to understand, rather than simply suppress it, means that something in you already knows how to work with it. You do not need to force it further. You do not need to close it in shame. You need exactly what this section describes: time, support, integration, and the patient willingness to let what you saw become part of you, rather than something that haunts you from the outside. So the question, can you unknow what you have seen, has two real answers. No, you cannot. The door, once genuinely opened, does not close. But yes, in a different sense, you can learn to live with what you have seen. You can learn to integrate rather than be overwhelmed. You can learn to carry the weight rather than be crushed by it. But that learning takes time. It takes humility. It takes the willingness to admit that opening was only the beginning, and that what comes after the opening is where the real work lives. The warning was never meant to frighten you away. It was meant to make sure you were ready to stay. Psychosis or enlightenment, the thin line. You are walking down a busy street. Suddenly, you realize that everything is connected. The people, the buildings, the clouds, the cracks in the pavement. It's all one thing. You feel an overwhelming sense of love and unity. You start to cry. A stranger approaches and asks if you're okay. You try to explain. They look at you with concern. They pull out their phone. They call for help. Same experience. Two interpretations. In one context, it's called a mystical awakening. In another, it's called psychosis. Dr. Louis Sass at Rutgers University spent decades studying the overlap between schizophrenia and mystical experience. His conclusion is unsettling. From the inside, the experiences can feel identical. The dissolution of the self, the sense that ordinary reality is a veil, the feeling of receiving special messages from the universe, the conviction that you have access to hidden truths that others cannot see. The difference is not in the experience itself. The difference is in the aftermath. Can you function? Can you hold a job? Can you maintain relationships? Can you distinguish between subjective insight and objective fact? Can you step back from your experience and say, that was profound, but it's time to make breakfast? The ancient mystics knew this thin line. In the Tibetan tradition, there is a saying, one person's enlightenment is another person's madness. The difference, they said, is bodhicitta, the wish to attain awakening for the benefit of all beings. If your experience makes you more compassionate, more humble, more present, it is tending toward enlightenment. If it makes you grandiose, isolated, or terrified, it is tending toward madness. Dr. Stanislav Grof, who studied both psychedelic experiences and spontaneous spiritual emergencies, developed a framework for distinguishing between psychosis and spiritual crisis. In psychosis, the person typically loses the ability to reality test. They cannot recognize that their inner experiences are subjective. They insist that everyone else is wrong or blind. In spiritual crisis, the person retains some capacity for self-reflection. They may be overwhelmed, but they can still say, I don't know what's happening to me. Grof also noted that the outcome depends heavily on the environment. In a culture that recognizes spiritual emergence, a person in crisis is supported. They are given rituals, guidance, and community. They are told that what they are experiencing is real but temporary, meaningful but not absolute. In a culture that only recognizes pathology, the same person is medicated, isolated, and labeled. And the label can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is the warning. You cannot simply declare your third eye open and expect everyone to celebrate. In the modern world, unusual inner experiences are often pathologized. You might find yourself on the wrong side of the thin line, not because you are mentally ill, but because the culture has no container for what you are going through. The mystics would say, do not seek extraordinary experiences without also seeking a community that can hold them. Do not open your third eye without also building a support system of people who will not call you crazy. Do not pursue visions without also cultivating the humility to accept that you might, in fact, be wrong about what you are seeing, because the line is real, and it is thinner than you think. The forbidden eye in Gnostic Christianity. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer near the town of Nag Hammadi made a discovery that would change biblical scholarship forever. He unearthed a sealed jar containing 13 leather-bound papyrus codices. Inside were texts that had been buried for over 1,600 years. Texts that the early Christian church had declared heretical. Texts that offered a radically different vision of Jesus, of salvation, and of the human soul. Among them was the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. And in that Gospel, you find this saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." The Gnostic Christians, the ones who wrote and preserved these texts, believed that the divine spark was hidden inside every human being. The physical world was not the creation of the highest God. It was the flawed creation of a lesser being, the demiurge. And the path to salvation was not faith in an external savior. It was gnosis, direct inner knowledge, the awakening of the eye within. They called this eye the nous, the spiritual intellect, the eye of the heart. They said that most people go through life with the nous asleep. They see only the surface of things. They are trapped in the illusion that the material world is all that exists. But when the nous awakens, you see through the illusion. You recognize the divine spark in yourself and in others. You remember where you came from. The Gnostic texts are full of warnings about this awakening. In the Apocryphon of John, the Savior appears to John and says, "Do not tell anyone about these things except those who are worthy." The Gnostics had a word for people who were not ready. They called them the psychikoi, the merely psychic, the ones who could not bear the truth. To tell them about the inner eye would be dangerous. They would misunderstand. They would use the knowledge to feed their ego. They would become worse, not better. This is the forbidden aspect of Gnostic Christianity. The early church fathers, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, condemned the Gnostics precisely because they kept secrets. They accused them of elitism, of hiding the true path to salvation from ordinary believers. And the church won that argument. The Gnostic texts were buried. The third eye was declared heresy. But the mystics within Christianity continued to teach it. They just used different words. Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican, spoke of the ground of the soul, a place where God is born in the soul. He said that in that ground, there is no distinction between you and the divine. He was investigated for heresy. He died before his trial concluded. The anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, a 14th century English mystical text, wrote about a blind gaze, a way of looking at God without images or thoughts. He warned that this gaze could not be forced. It could only be received as a gift. And he warned that some people would be terrified by it. They would prefer the comfort of ordinary prayer, ordinary belief, ordinary certainty. The Gnostic Jesus says, "The kingdom of God is within you, not in a church, not in a book, not in a priest, inside you. But to see it, you need an eye that most people have forgotten they have. And once you see it, you cannot pretend you haven't." That is the forbidden fruit of Christianity, not an apple, a way of seeing. And the church forbade it not because it was false, but because it was dangerous. Dangerous to authority, dangerous to institutions, dangerous to anyone who profits from keeping people asleep. The Watchers. Look at a dollar bill. Right there, above the unfinished pyramid, inside a triangle of light, is a single disembodied eye. Most people glance at it and think of conspiracy theories, secret societies, hidden power. And while those associations have their own complicated history, they tend to pull attention away from a question that is far more interesting and far more strange. Why does that symbol exist at all? Not just on the dollar bill, everywhere, across civilizations that had no contact with each other, across thousands of years of human history. The single eye, solitary, watchful, luminous, appears in the symbolic vocabulary of cultures separated by oceans and centuries, as though they were all trying to draw the same thing from memory. The Eye of Horus in ancient Egypt, one of the most reproduced symbols in all of human history, associated with healing, protection, royal power, and the restoration of what was damaged. We will return to Horus and his wound in the next section, but notice for now that it is always one eye, not two. One. The evil eye, the Matiasma in Greek, the Nazar in Turkish and Arabic, the Ayin Hara in Hebrew, spans the entire Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world. The belief that a single concentrated gaze can transmit harm. That envy, focused through the eye of another person, can cause illness, bad luck, and invisible damage. This belief did not travel from one culture to another. It appeared independently, repeatedly, as though it were describing something real about the nature of focused perception. Odin, the chief of the Norse gods, sacrificed one of his eyes at the well of Mimir in exchange for wisdom. He did not lose his sight. He traded ordinary two-eyed vision for something deeper. He became the all-seeing not by gaining an eye, but by giving one up. The sacrifice of external perception in exchange for internal knowing. One eye closed to the world so that a deeper eye could open. The Cyclops of Greek mythology, Polyphemus, the creature Odysseus blinds in the cave, has been interpreted by scholars not merely as a monster, but as a symbol of undeveloped singular vision, power without wisdom, the single eye that sees brute force but cannot perceive consequence or nuance, a warning about what concentrated perception becomes when it is not tempered by understanding. And then there is the Eye of Providence itself. Before it appeared on American currency, it appeared in Christian iconography as the Eye of God, all-seeing, omniscient, positioned above the world in a triangle representing the Trinity. The eye that misses nothing. The eye before which nothing can be hidden. Carl Jung would have called this a universal archetype, an image so deeply embedded in human symbolic cognition that it arises independently across cultures because it is pointing at something real in the structure of consciousness itself. Not a physical eye, not a conspiracy, but a fundamental human intuition about the nature of perception, that there is a kind of seeing that is singular, concentrated, and qualitatively different from ordinary two-eyed vision. A seeing that knows rather than merely observes. What is striking when you lay all of these symbols side by side is the consistency of what they associate with the single eye. It is never casual. It is never comfortable. It is always connected to power, to knowledge, to sacrifice, to protection, or to danger. Nobody in the ancient world painted a single eye to represent ordinary everyday awareness. The single eye always meant something elevated, something concentrated, something that carried weight. This matters for our conversation because it suggests that the third eye is not a modern invention. It is not a New Age rebranding of something that never existed. It is one of the oldest recurring images in the entire symbolic record of our species. Generation after generation, in language and stone and paint and myth, human beings kept drawing the same picture, kept returning to the same idea. One eye, watching, knowing, dangerous in the wrong hands, transformative in the right ones. The question worth sitting with is not where this symbol came from. The question is why it never went away. Hildegard of Bingen and her visions. Imagine being a woman in the 12th century. You are the 10th child of a noble family. Your parents dedicate you to the church. You are enclosed in a stone cell with a single window. You will spend most of your life there. And then something begins to happen. You see lights, visions. The world itself becomes luminous. You see the inside of things. You see the structure of creation. This was Hildegard of Bingen. She was a Benedictine abbess, a composer, a botanist, a physician, a theologian. She wrote books of visions approved by the Pope. She defied church authorities. And she described her visions in vivid, precise detail. She saw a light, the living light, lux vivens. It was more real than the sun. In that light, she saw the entire cosmos. She saw the human body as a microcosm of the universe. Remarkably, Hildegard described the brain's ventricles, the fluid-filled cavities in the center of the brain, centuries before the invention of the MRI. Her diagrams are recognizable to modern neurologists. How did she know? One possibility is that she was seeing through her third eye. But Hildegard also received warnings. She was told not to share everything she saw. Some things were too dangerous for ordinary people. She navigated carefully, submitting her visions to church authorities, framing them in orthodox language. She survived. In her book, Scivias, Know the Ways, she describes a vision of a great mountain. On the mountain is a figure with eyes on the front and back of its head. It sees everything, but the figure is weeping, because the people below are blind. They have eyes, but do not see. They walk past the mountain every day and never notice it. Hildegard says the third eye is not a reward for the holy, it is a necessity, because without it, you are walking through a world of meaning and missing all of it. But she also says the third eye can be terrifying. Once you see, you become responsible. Hildegard lived to be 81. She never stopped seeing, but she integrated her visions into a life of practical service. She wrote medical texts, composed music, governed her monastery. She did not float away into the light. She planted gardens, treated the sick, and argued with bishops. That is the model. The third eye opens, you see the living light, and then you wash the dishes, because the dishes are also the living light. The pineal gland and sleep paralysis. You are falling asleep. Your body relaxes. Your breathing slows. And then something strange happens. You are awake, or you think you are awake, but you cannot move. Your eyes may open. You can see your room, but your body is paralyzed. And sometimes you feel a presence in the room, something watching you, something standing in the corner, something sitting on your chest. This is sleep paralysis. It affects approximately 8% of the general population, more in students and shift workers. It occurs during the transition between wakefulness and sleep, when your brain has released the neurotransmitter glycine to paralyze your voluntary muscles, so you don't act out your dreams. But your conscious mind has not fully lost awareness. In many cultures, sleep paralysis is interpreted as a spiritual experience. In Newfoundland, it's called the old hag, a witch who sits on your chest. In Brazil, it's called pisadeira, the one who steps on you. In Japan, it's called kanashibari, being bound by metal. In the medieval European tradition, it was attributed to incubi and succubi, demons that attack sleeping people. The mystics would recognize sleep paralysis as a state where the third eye is open without the protection of the waking ego. Your physical eyes may be open, but your inner eye is also active. You are seeing into a space between worlds, and what you see there is shaped by your fears, your expectations, and your cultural conditioning. Dr. Andreas Mavromatis, in his book Hypnagogia, studied the state between waking and sleeping, the hypnagogic state. He found that this state produces visions, sounds, and sensations that are qualitatively different from ordinary perception. The hypnagogic state is associated with increased activity in the pineal gland. The research is suggestive, but not conclusive. What is clear is that the threshold of sleep is a doorway, and many traditions have warned about lingering too long in that doorway. The ancient yogis taught that the third eye is naturally active during the hypnagogic state. This is why you see images, hear voices, or have insights just as you fall asleep. The trick is not to get caught in the doorway. The trick is to pass through, either into sleep or into waking, without getting stuck in the space where your body is paralyzed, but your mind is alert. Why the warning? Because people who experience frequent sleep paralysis often develop anxiety about sleeping. They begin to fear the night. They avoid going to bed. And this avoidance can spiral into insomnia, depression, and a sense of being haunted. The mystics would say, do not fear the doorway, but do not loiter there. If you find yourself in sleep paralysis, relax your body. Surrender to the paralysis. Direct your attention to your breath. Do not fight the presence you feel. It cannot hurt you. It is a projection of your own mind. The third eye is showing you your own fear. Breathe, and you will pass through. The third eye is not always a lens that shows you truth. Sometimes it is a mirror that shows you your own shadow. And in the hypnagogic state, that shadow can appear as a demon, a witch, a figure in the corner. But the demon is you. The witch is you. The figure is the part of yourself you have not yet befriended. When you learn to breathe through sleep paralysis, when you learn to greet the presence with curiosity instead of terror, you are doing something profound. You are learning to open your third eye without fear. You are learning to see your own darkness and not run from it. That is the practice. Not to avoid the doorway, to walk through it with your eyes open. The serpent and the seed, Kundalini syndrome. Now we come to the most physically real of all the warnings. The one that sounds like metaphor but feels like fire. In the tantric traditions, Kundalini is described as a serpent of energy coiled at the base of the spine. When awakened, it rises through the central channel, piercing each chakra until it reaches the crown of the head. The experience is supposed to be blissful, liberating, transformative, but sometimes it is not. Sometimes it is hell. Gopi Krishna was a 20th century Indian mystic who wrote a book called Kundalini, The Evolutionary Energy in Man. In the 1930s, after 17 years of meditation, he experienced a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. He described a flood of light in his brain, a sensation of energy moving up his spine, and then something went wrong. The energy did not stop. It continued to flow day and night for months. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He felt burning sensations in his spine and brain. He experienced involuntary movements of his limbs. He heard internal sounds like rushing water and roaring fire. His emotions swung wildly between ecstasy and despair. He thought he was going insane. He thought he was going to die. Gopi Krishna survived. He eventually stabilized and integrated the energy, but he spent years in agony, and he wrote his book to warn others. He said that Kundalini is real. It is not a metaphor. It is a biological process, and it can be dangerous. Modern research has documented similar cases. Dr. Lee Sanella, a psychiatrist and ophthalmologist, studied people experiencing what he called Kundalini syndrome. Some of the symptoms included involuntary bodily movements, spasms, jerks, rocking, paranoid ideation or grandiosity, sensory hypersensitivity, light, sound, and touch become overwhelming, a sense of losing the boundary between self and world. Sanella found that Kundalini syndrome is more common than most doctors realize, but because it is not recognized in standard medical textbooks, people are often misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or panic disorder. They are medicated, they are hospitalized, and the medication does not help the Kundalini symptoms because the medication is treating the wrong thing. The ancient texts warned about this. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika says that Kundalini should only be awakened under the guidance of a qualified teacher. The teacher knows how to ground the energy, how to direct it, how to stabilize the nervous system. Without a teacher, the practitioner is like a person sitting on a stick of dynamite. The warning is not that you should avoid Kundalini. The warning is that you should approach it with immense respect. You should prepare your body. You should purify your diet. You should practice grounding, physical exercise, walking barefoot on the earth, eating root vegetables. You should not be alone. You should have someone who can hold space for you when the energy becomes overwhelming. And you should know that the third eye is connected to the serpent. You cannot open the eye without also awakening the energy that rises to meet it. The light you see is not separate from the fire in your spine. They are the same thing, perceived in different locations. If you feel the serpent stirring, do not panic. Do not try to force it. Do not try to stop it. Breathe, ground, ask for help. And remember, this too shall pass. The fire does not last forever, but it will burn until you learn to dance with it. What ancient mystics actually warned about, and the middle way. After all of this, the pineal gland, the DMT, the Kundalini, the sleep paralysis, you might be wondering, what exactly were the mystics warning about? A list of dangers? A checklist of things to avoid? No, the warnings were simpler and more profound than that. The mystics warned that the third eye shows you reality, not a special, secret, higher reality, just reality. The reality that is already here, hidden beneath the layer of concepts and labels that your mind places on top of it. And they warned that reality, seen too quickly, can break a mind that hasn't learned to love what it sees. Right now, look around you. You see separate objects, a cup, a phone, a wall. Your brain segments the world into discrete things. That is useful. It keeps you alive. But the third eye sees differently. It sees the cup as a temporary arrangement of molecules that were once part of a tree, part of the earth, part of a star. It sees the wall as an arrangement that will one day crumble. It sees that you are not separate from any of it. Your boundaries, the ones you have spent your entire life building and defending, are illusions held in place by attention. This seeing is beautiful. It is also destabilizing. Your sense of self, your identity, your ambitions, your fears, depends on not seeing this way. When that assumption dissolves, the ground shifts. And if the ground shifts before you are ready, you fall. The mystics said you must prepare. You must build a container strong enough to hold the dissolution without shattering. That container is your body, your heart, your relationships, your willingness to be ordinary. Because the third eye does not show you anything new. It shows you what has always been there. The only thing that changes is your resistance to seeing it. If you open your third eye and become frightened, you will close it again. You will cling even harder to the illusion of separation. If you become arrogant, you will use it to feed your ego. If you become passive, you will float away from the world. That is the warning. Not that you shouldn't open it, but that you shouldn't open it alone, unprepared, or for the wrong reasons. Now consider a tradition that does not talk about the third eye at all. It does not encourage visions. It does not cultivate special powers. It does not seek extraordinary experiences. And it is one of the most profound spiritual traditions ever created: Zen Buddhism. The Zen masters taught that seeking the third eye is a form of delusion. You are looking for something you already have. You are chasing a light that is already shining. You are trying to become what you already are. In the Shobogenzo, the 13th century master Dogen wrote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. No chakras, no pineal glands, no inner light. Just the self, and forgetting the self, and being enlightened by everything. Not by a special vision, but by ordinary things. A cup, a stone, a breath." The Zen warning about the third eye is the most subtle of all. They say that the desire to open the third eye is the very thing that keeps it closed, because the desire is based on a belief that you are missing something. And the belief that you are missing something is the very illusion you are trying to see through. A student once asked the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki, "What is the third eye?" Suzuki said, "Your two eyes are fine. Pay attention to them." The student pressed, "But I want to see what the mystics saw." Suzuki said, "You are seeing it now. You just don't recognize it because you are looking for something else." This is the middle way. Not rejecting the third eye, not chasing it, just sitting, just breathing, just being present to what is already here. If the third eye opens, it opens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The sun still rises. The breath still comes and goes. The heart still beats. The Zen masters warn against spiritual ambition, what they call the stink of enlightenment. the odor of self-congratulation that clings to anyone who believes they have attained something. The third eye is not a trophy. It is not a rank. It is not a sign of progress. It is simply a mode of perception that arises naturally when you stop trying to control your experience. So here is the paradoxical teaching. If you want to open your third eye, stop trying to open your third eye. Sit down. Close your physical eyes. Breathe. Notice the space between your thoughts. Do this every day. Do it without expectation. Do it without goal. And one day, you might notice that you have been seeing through your third eye all along. You just didn't have a name for it. The middle way is not the path of least resistance. It is the path of no resistance. It is the path of accepting things as they are, including your own resistance, including your own desire for visions, including your own fear of what you might see. Breathe, rest, allow. That is the grounded awakening, not flying into the light, but sitting still in the dark and noticing that the dark is also light. How to open safely, if you choose to. You have heard the warnings, you have heard the dangers, and still, something in you wants to know, wants to see, wants to open the door, just a crack, just to see what is on the other side. If that is you, if you choose to proceed, proceed with wisdom, not with fear, not with recklessness, with wisdom. The first thing the mystics would tell you is this: begin with your body, not with your mind, not with your third eye, with the ground beneath your feet. The third eye opens from below, not from above. Your body is the container for the energy. If the container is weak, cracked, or neglected, whatever pours in will leak or burn. So eat real food, sleep, exercise, walk barefoot on the earth when you can, get sunlight on your skin, breathe deeply and slowly as a daily habit, not as a technique, but as a way of reminding your nervous system that it is safe. Your physical body is not an obstacle to awakening. It is the vehicle of awakening. The mystics who lasted, the ones who opened and did not shatter, were almost always people who treated their bodies with deep respect. The second thing is harder. Before the third eye can see clearly outward, it will show you what is unresolved inside you. Grief you have not grieved, anger you have not acknowledged, patterns you have been repeating without noticing. If you have not done the work of honest self-examination, through therapy, through journaling, through the difficult conversations you have been avoiding, the third eye will force that work on you in ways and at times you did not choose. The ancient teachers knew this. It is why they required years of ethical and emotional purification before any student was given advanced practices. Do not use spirituality to bypass your psychological wounds. The eye will find them regardless. Better to find them first, on your own terms, with support. That support is the third thing. Do not open your third eye alone. This sounds simple, but it is perhaps the most violated of all the traditional warnings in the modern era. Find people who understand spiritual emergence. A teacher, a mentor, a community, even a single trusted friend who will not call you crazy when you are confused and will not inflate your ego when you are having visions. People who can hold space for your fear without trying to fix it. People who can tell the difference between a genuine crisis and a temporary disorientation. The traditions that produced the great seers were never solitary enterprises. They were communities of practice. The lone spiritual seeker, consuming content in isolation, is a modern invention, and it is a fragile one. When it comes to practice itself, the mystics would counsel attention over force. The third eye does not respond to aggression. It does not open because you stared intensely at the space between your eyebrows until your head ached. That is straining, and straining produces tension, not vision. Instead, practice open awareness. Sit quietly. Notice the space behind your eyes. Notice the subtle darkness there, the faint colors, the images that arise without your choosing them. Do not chase those images. Do not reject them. Simply notice them, the way you might notice clouds passing overhead, present, acknowledged, and allowed to pass. This quality of soft, patient, non-grasping attention is the actual practice. Everything else is preparation for it. And then, whatever arises, a dream, a vision, a moment of sudden intuition, a feeling of inexplicable knowing, bring it back into your ordinary life. Ask yourself honestly what it means for the way you treat the people you love. Ask what it means for how you spend your days. If an experience does not eventually translate into some form of changed action or deepened presence, it is not integration. It is entertainment. The mystics were ruthless about this distinction. The vision that makes you more compassionate, more humble, more useful to others, that is a real opening. The vision that makes you feel special, elevated, or separate from ordinary people, that is the ego wearing a spiritual costume. Know also when to stop. The third eye is not a competition, and you do not accumulate merit by pushing through exhaustion, disorientation, or distress. If your practice is costing you sleep, appetite, relationships, or your capacity to function in the ordinary world, stop. Not forever. Just stop for now. Go for a walk. Eat something. Watch something that makes you laugh. The third eye will still be there when you return. The ground will still be there, and you will return to it stronger for having rested than you would have been for having forced your way through. Finally, and above all else, do not forget the heart. The mystics across every tradition place the heart above the third eye in the hierarchy of importance. The eye sees. The heart understands what the seeing means. Without the heart, inner vision becomes cold, a detached analytical perception that can see suffering without knowing how to respond to it. With the heart, the third eye becomes something else entirely. It becomes wisdom. So before you ask what you might see, ask what you already love. Let love lead. Let love be the reason you seek. Let love be the light that illuminates whatever the eye reveals. You will make mistakes on this path. You will see things you wish you hadn't. There will be moments when you wish you had never looked. That is not failure. That is the path. The eye that opened through wounding, like the Eye of Horus, sees more truly than the eye that was never tested. Open slowly. Open with love. Open with help. And when you need to sleep, to eat, to sit with someone you love in ordinary silence, close it. Rest in the ordinary. Because the ordinary, seen clearly, is where the infinite lives. You are not your third eye. You are the one who sees through it. And that one, the one who sees, is already whole, already awake, already home. The ceiling of glass, final reflection. You have traveled a long road, from the darkness of the first warning, through the anatomy of the pineal gland, through the visions of Descartes and Hildegard, through the shadow of clairvoyance and the fire of Kundalini. You have heard what the mystics said and what the scientists found. You have seen the thin line between psychosis and enlightenment, between spiritual bypass and genuine awakening. And now you are here, at the end, or perhaps at the beginning. Close your eyes, not to meditate, not to try anything, just to rest, just to be. Notice the darkness behind your eyelids. Notice the subtle colors that swim in that darkness. Notice the presence of your own attention, the quiet awareness that is reading these words, that has been here the whole time. That awareness is not your third eye. It is deeper than any eye. It is the ground on which the third eye opens and closes. It is the screen on which all visions appear. It is the space in which all warnings are heard and all choices are made. The mystics called this many things: the witness, the seer, the self, the ground of being. But none of those words capture it. It cannot be captured. It can only be recognized. And the recognition is not an event. It is a slow, quiet, unspectacular homecoming. So here is the final reflection. The third eye is real. The warnings are real. The dangers are real. But beneath all of that, you are real. You are the one who is choosing, right now, whether to open or close, whether to look or look away, whether to seek or to rest. Do not let anyone tell you that you must open your third eye. Do not let anyone tell you that you must not. It is your choice, your path, your timing. And if you choose to open it slowly. Open it with love. Open it with humility. Open it knowing that you will make mistakes, that you will see things you wish you hadn't, that you will sometimes wish you had never looked. And if you choose not to open it, that is not a failure. That is wisdom. The ordinary eye sees enough. The ordinary heart loves enough. The ordinary life, lived with attention and care, is already a door to the infinite. You do not need a third eye to touch the sky. You need only to be here, now. Breathing. The ceiling of glass is not above you. It is the illusion that you are separate from what you seek. You are not separate. You have never been separate. The third eye does not bring you closer to the truth. It shows you that you were never far away. So breathe. Rest. Let the warnings settle. Let the knowledge settle. And when you are ready, today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, look again. Look with the eyes you already have. Look at the person next to you. Look at the sky. Look at your own hands. What do you see? Not with your third eye, with your heart. That is the only answer that matters. That is the only warning that holds. That is the only door that never closes.